this earlier, but I hadn't figured out the technology piece. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to your business conference. I apologize, I have to join virtually. I think it's going to be a while before I can come back to the US. So we'll make do with what we can.
Yes, not a problem. Thank you so much for joining us. So my name is Bongiwe, and I'll go ahead and introduce you to our audience today. So thank you so much, Iyinoluwa, for joining us. So Iyinoluwa Aboyeji is the... Can you hear us?
Awesome, no problems.
Okay. So Iyinoluwa Aboyeji is the general partner and co-founder of Future Africa, a platform that provides capital, coaching, and community for mission-driven innovators building an African future where purpose and prosperity is within everyone's reach. He is passionate about partnering with missionary talent and capital to build an African future. He spent the last few years as CEO of Flutterwave, a business building payments technology and infrastructure to connect Africa to the global economy. Over those years, he led the company to become one of the fastest growing payments technology businesses of all time, processing over $2 billion across over 50 million transactions with annual revenues of millions of dollars a year. It has also attracted significant investment from experienced players in the global payments arena, such as the Y Combinator investors in Stripe, Greycroft, Greenvisor Capital, and Mastercard, among others. Thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bongiwe. I hope I got that right. So I'm not sure what format we should take, but I'll just share for perhaps the next 10 to 15 minutes. And I think usually the best parts of these things are the questions and answers. So excited to hear from you and to talk more. Anyway, I wouldn't go into too much of my background, given that we've already discussed that. But I know one question that I've been pondering on a lot in the last, I'd say couple months or maybe the last couple years is really, we're in a really privileged point in time in the African technology ecosystem. And it's very easy to look at the journey of the last 10 years and arrive at the conclusion that now is the time to celebrate, and people wouldn't be wrong necessarily to do that. But I think something that I'm learning, or something I'm becoming more and more attuned to, is just the importance of really acknowledging what it would take for us to realize the promise that is the opportunity that this funding means for the continent. And last year, many of you probably know, entrepreneurs raised $5 billion from investors, and that's a really good thing. But I'm of the opinion that there's an element of that worries me, which is really around, what would it take to actually realize that now? For those of us that are new to venture economics, what it generally means when an investor writes a check is that they want to get back 10 times their money. So that means that at some point, for the $5 billion that has come into the ecosystem, we need to be able to give the investors $500 billion, $50 billion. And just to set the context, $50 billion, is over 10% of Nigeria's GDP. And there's a real question, actually, of whether the ecosystem is on a path to be able to return, because you're not going to just return the full $50 billion. You're going to make more than that so that the founders also keep something and employees keep something. So you're looking at perhaps possibly an ecosystem that is $500 billion. And $500 billion happens to be, the size of the Nigerian economy, greater than the size of the Nigerian economy, just alone. So essentially, for these businesses to be able to return the intended capital, they need to be able to double our GDP. And I think that's the important question that I'm wondering, now we've taken in this money, how can we double the GDP? And I think for me, there are three things that I find particularly important on the continent to have a conversation around. And I don't know answers, I just think about these things every day. And the first is, there are three things. The first is talent, the second is infrastructure, and the third is governance. The talent question is an important one because, Google just recently released an interesting report about the state of the developer ecosystem. It was a beautifully done thing. I think they mentioned that last year we grew our developer ecosystem by 2,500 developers, which seems like a lot on the surface, but it's not really a lot if you really think deeply about what the consequences are. And so you've got quite an inflation of developer wages. And that's not the only skill set that's missing. You're looking for middle managers, you're looking for designers, you're looking for product managers. There's so many different skill sets that go into building a $500 billion digital economy. And it's not clear that we have a clear path or sign about how we would go about finding that talent. And I think if you think about the broader issues, they're very foundational, right? Because you're thinking, okay, even if you were going to attempt to find this talent on your own, what role will, broken public institutions play? We've got 35 million kids out of school. So what does that look like? How do you do this in a way that doesn't exacerbate inequality, right? How do you do this in a way that can scale? Because you need a lot and a lot of people. So these are the questions that keep one up at night. The second is infrastructure. Because the reality is, we look at that 5 billion, what people should really be seeing is $1 billion of investment in broadband over the last 10 years across Africa. From C-Squared to Main One these are the unsung heroes of whatever you would call this revolution. And the question is, what kind of infrastructure will be necessary for us to be able to achieve the gains of the next 10 years? And this is a very important question that all of us have to be ready to answer. And I think when you ponder that question carefully, I don't know what comes to mind for most people, but what comes to mind for me is thinking carefully about the needs of, the broad category of young people that are desperate to live in a society where Africans can do something for the world, where it's not just the world doing something for Africa, and what kind of skills they would need to be able to do so. And the realization that more than half of the world's working population comes from Africa. So what do you need from an infrastructure standpoint to be able to do that? And we traditionally think about infrastructure as roads and bridges, and they're great infrastructure. But then we're not talking about infrastructure for an industrial economy, we're talking about infrastructure for a digital economy. And what that typically looks like is less about roads and bridges, but things like, nice places to live, power, internet, security, decent living and workspaces for young people, where they can contribute to the digital economy without worrying, without stressing. And we face, back to the talent challenge, we've got upward pressure because we've trained quite a number of people in our time. And then what happens very quickly is that, because of the quest for better quality of life, given the value that they're creating globally, they emigrate as soon as they have the skill set. So what can you do to build infrastructure that can retain talent for the digital economy? And then at the end of the day, the last and the most important question is the governance question. And I think that the way we traditionally answer this question is to hope and pray. I think that's the way the development people do it. And I think the biggest realization is that's not going to be enough. We got to have a governance agenda for the digital economy. And that means, laws have to be changed, and that means a lot of lobbying has to take place. And that means we have to be thinking very carefully about what the future of our countries hold, and ultimately what levers we have to bring change to the ways our countries run. These are all extremely important in thinking about the governance elements of the digital economy. There are global issues that we have to contextualize into our environment, and we need to have firm responses and clear direction from our leaders about how those challenges will be responded to, whether they're cryptocurrency, whether it's different elements of artificial intelligence and data, whether it's biotechnology. They're all going to have far-reaching consequences on our society. So who's answering those questions about how they should be used and what should go where? This is extremely important. But I think at the end of the day, when we answer these questions about talent, infrastructure, and governance, the most important question to answer is the one of impact. Right now, we do live in a two-sided technology society where you've got the haves and the have-nots. In many cases, it actually doesn't differ too much from what I experienced in a place like San Francisco when I was there, where you've got this hyper-talented young people that are making billions, and then you've got homelessness right at their doorstep. And I think the question that our community has to answer is one of purpose. What is all these billions for? If it's just about us being able to live great lives and build companies that are profitable and return capital to our investors, I'd say it's been a waste of time. But if we're ultimately able to deploy this capital to support the people in achieving their goals as we serve them, and maybe we capture a little bit of the value, I think we would have served well. And I hope that that's the aspiration for most of our people. So yeah, I'm excited to find out which way the continent decides to go, and I'm also excited about what people like you can do to support, and also delighted to answer your questions. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you, and I'll be delighted to take your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences thus far and lessons, I guess, about VC in Africa through your great career so far. So my question is, venture capital is now the dominant asset class in emerging markets, but it does also have a history and a culture of gender and racial bias when hiring and investing. But I think most relevant for the continent is, certain biases towards perhaps African women as startup leaders. How do you feel as a leader in this space? Do you find yourself as an ally for empowering African women in taking more dominant power within this space? So that's my first question. And my second is about really this idea that 70% of venture funding in Africa goes to expat funders. How do we tackle the fact that a lot of that money, because of being able to show credit history, is not really going to on the ground funders and entrepreneurs? Thank you.
Those are great questions. I'll start with the first one. I think for us, we've always looked at funding women as an economic imperative. And so we don't think about it in terms of empowerment. We think about it in terms of commercial value. And the revealing thing is, last year, we actually had a mandate. We said we needed to blow past this noise and get very quickly to a point where we can deploy $2 million, $1 million, sorry, of the $3.7 million we deployed last year into women. We hit the target in 5 months. And then we proceeded to deploy another $1 million more than we committed. And I think that's the beauty of a market-driven approach, is that, you know, because we were now looking, we had opened our eyes because we had a mandate. We were now looking for value in places people didn't think they existed, right? And we invested in some really serious businesses. I'm not talking about Mickey Mouse businesses. We invested in, you know, the second clearing bank in England in the last over 100 years. We invested in one of the largest insurance networks on the continent. We invested in, you know, people who were building, you know, transportation networks. We invested in so many other businesses run by women, and there were commercial transactions that passed any test. So I find oftentimes, because, you know, discrimination is a filter. It's a bad filter, but it's a filter nonetheless, right? And what often happens is, because especially, you know, before you get to the level where, you know, you get to an investor like me, you've passed through many filters, right? And obviously discrimination is one of those filters. And so firms just have to make a very conscious effort to look past their bad filters, right? And find pathways to the companies that matter. And also train their people and give women power within the organization to be able to make the right decisions. Because, you know, women can see other women, Sawubona, you know, they know what's going on, and then they can help somebody else. So that's very important, that's the way we tackle it. I don't really subscribe to the, you know, ESG, because I feel like it's a lowering of the bar that's unfair to women. We don't need to lower the bar to find great investments. And then, you know, I think for the, in my language, we say Oyinbo, for the Oyinbo problem, Oyinbo funding problem. I think when it boils down to it, right, our business is one of return. So it doesn't matter how your color of your skin, the shine on your white, the degree you got. At the end of the day, it stacks up to numbers. And when you think about the businesses, the top 5, 6, 7 businesses in the continent, the ones that have actually fulfilled potential, you find that it's our people who run them, right? Now, I acknowledge that the biggest problem that the asset class has had is that the capital doesn't come from our people. And so oftentimes there's a bias to the capital from source. And, you know, it's one thing for you to politely request capital. It's another thing for you to seize it. And I don't know that we're really in the business of the latter. So I think at the end of the day, the real question should be, what can we as Africans do to bet on ourselves? How can we build our own capital stack? Today, you know, in Nigeria, at the very least, 6-7% of all our assets are tied up in government securities, right? We wouldn't lend to a drunk politician, even a sane one, right? But we lend to government. Most of our assets are tied up in government. We need to do something about that across our countries, where we have to be able to cut down the size of government and make sure that, you know, capital, scarce capital, is not going towards wasteful government spending, but is going towards entrepreneurs. That's ultimately when we're going to make a dent. But for so long as we've hampered ourselves and made important capital subject to, you know, the whims and caprices of global aid organizations with agendas, we can't blame them for giving capital to their friends.
Thank you. These are very interesting points you're putting forth. And I want to push back a little bit and ask you, you know, with this idea of investing for impact, and you as an investor, do you seek a 10x return, or is it more about the way in which you are reconfiguring sort of the capital stack, or just the way in which market flows are taking place? And do we risk market distortion in Africa by seeking those high returns?
I think the first thing that I've come to terms with is that profit and impact are aligned. There's a real question of what comes first. Don't get me wrong, right? And that should be impact, right? But I've recognized over the years that so long as you're making a difference in someone's life, you're creating value. And ultimately, the profit question is how much of that value can you capture? And I've seen this with my own eyes, when we invested, and worked in Andela, right? And we're taking people from $100 a month in income to $100,000 a year in 30 months, right? We're creating real value. This was not paper return. This was money in people's pockets. Families were changing. People were becoming multi-millionaires overnight on the back of skills that they had incredible passion for, but never thought would vault them into the levels they got to, the stratosphere they got to in their wildest dreams. And so we earned the right to take a cut of that wealth we were creating. And today, Andela is very quickly approaching, if not over, $100 million a year business. And that is the beauty of investment, right? When it's done right, is that profit and impact can be aligned. And I think for us as a firm, we only bother with investing when that is true. We don't, if it's about investing in something that makes a lot of money but not a lot of impact, you can just easily count us out because we don't think that kind of profit is sustainable, right? So I think that's how we need to think about the profit and impact. I also have a big problem with the other counter argument, which is the impact without profit. And why do I have a problem with that? I think, first of all, from a sustainability perspective, it's not sustainable. But I think what bothers me more is the extent to which impact without profit tends to subject the lot of Africans to the whims and caprices of, academicians, right? There's no way for you to create a feedback loop that makes us customers, right? We're always beneficiaries. And I think in the kind of partnership Africa requires, we're no longer looking to be beneficiaries. We're looking to be partners. We're looking to be customers. We're looking to be served. We're not looking to be pitied. So I would rather that, impact meant that I saw a service of value to me. I paid for it either with my time or my money, right? And so I don't owe you anything and you don't owe me anything. I think that's more respectable relationship. Not that, you came to my village and gave me water. And even though the water, I still had to trek 5 miles to get it, I just have to be grateful because after all, it's impact. Yeah, I'm not interested. That's a poor product. I want a product where you've given me, the ability to get pipe-on water in my neighborhood. I'm paying for my water. I don't owe you anything. You don't owe me anything. That's a better relationship. So that's how I see it.
Thank you. So I'm understanding your mandate, your investment mandate is mostly about agency and profit where we can get it. So now I'm going to hand over to my fellow teammate here, Nee, who has a few questions of his own. Thank you.
Can you? Hi, Mr. Aboyeji. Thank you for joining us. I have 2 questions. First one is about COVID. And I want to also say that it's great news that Flutterwave is making waves and headlines in the world with your recent 250 million raising of capital for Flutterwave. Now, my question to you is COVID. Have you noticed, sorry, can you see me? All right. So yeah, back to my question. I want to ask a question about COVID. During this time in COVID, I think what I've noticed is that private equity and venture capital firms are kind of shifting their focus to Africa. I'm not sure, but my guess is that the capital markets and equity markets in the Western world is kind of unstable right now. If you look at the stock markets and other places like the bond market, do you agree with me on that sense that this is kind of like a way for private equity firms to kind of focus on Africa more and look for other places where they can put their money? Second question to you is, I was just in this tech panel, and it's kind of a coincidental. It's kind of a coincidence that you mentioned that one of the main problems that we're facing in Africa is talent. I know you touched on infrastructure being one of the main things, but beyond that, do you see any way that we can kind of keep our talents here, and how can we do that? Because losing them to Western world and people to benefit from is such much of a disadvantage to us.
Great questions. I'll just take them one at a time. So the first question was, you were asking about why I think.
Iyinoluwa, you are muted.
Oh no. Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Continue, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So the first question was around why is private equity moving into Africa in such numbers? There are many theories, but I think last year, the reality is, if you look globally, right, there were very few investment destinations that really gave you an emerging market exposure. You had the US, but the US is what the US is, right? People pay for it for what it is. Europe is not quite the returns basket you're expecting. I think that what was happening with Africa was, China was not an option. And so you had to look elsewhere. And there was so much money being pumped into the system that you had to quickly, redeploy it for risk-adjusted returns. So why go invest in somewhere safe when you have Africa, which is, a bit of a wild card, but still very much, an option. So I think really that was what drove a lot of the funding. I think it's just, China shut down, and so they needed somebody else to park money. And so that meant Africa was a willing place. But again, the macro arguments, it doesn't make the macro arguments wrong, i.e., we're at the early innings of a technological revolution. The talent is getting better, infrastructure has arrived, all that is true, but I don't think if China went offline, and China was a big suck of capital, I don't think if China was still online, they would be giving us this type of prioritization. And I think the question is, how much of this can we take advantage of before the taps go dry? So we just have to be living in constant paranoia on that level. In terms of retaining talent, I think the biggest challenge with retaining talent really is, it's not about money, because now everybody has the money to retain talent. It's about quality of life. And quality of life is a function of infrastructure and governance, right? Governance, can the police not harass me? Can I not have to pay bribes when I'm walking through the airport? Can my family get access to decent health care? I don't mind paying for it. Can I find a good school for my kids? Because the expectation is governance will then provide the right infrastructure for guaranteeing quality of life. So the only way to retain our talent is to work on the governance. And in the absence of working on the governance, then we have to be ready to put private capital into infrastructure. And it's not sustainable to do so, right? So at the end of the day, it still boils down to what are we doing with our elections. Until those change, they're not going to be able to stop the exit.
No, fantastic. Actually, I just saw somebody put in the chat that we need policy reform. So we are on unison here, and we hope that these conversations are going to drive change. Thank you for answering my questions. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and co-chair Bongiwe to go on with the questions.
Thank you, Nee. So now we are going to answer some questions that have come through in the chat. So the first question for you today, what solutions do you think the private sector has, if any, in tackling the roots of bad governance in Nigeria and other African nations?
Yeah, they have a lot of clout. They have money. They have money. So the reality is, the private sector in Africa has just refused to take responsibility for the society. And it's sad. I think the expectation for many of them, maybe because of how they got their money, was a lot of rent and all that, is that somebody else is going to come and clean up governance. But I think they're going to find out that, governance has its impact on business, right? Hopefully they've learned that lesson in this episode, at least in Nigeria, maybe in Kenya, but hopefully, that's something they're willing to work towards, and I think, look, ultimately, we have about $42 billion companies on the continent, maybe a couple $100 million companies on the continent, a couple thousand, maybe. If they decided they were going to go and pick their colleagues from the private sector and back them with enough cash to win elections, it will be a piece of cake. But without that moral suasion, it's impossible for any kind of action to take place. So yes, I think the private sector has a great solution, which is money.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And so to build on this next question, you've been asked, you mentioned one of the challenges, or should I say conditions tied to seeking capital, which is an expectation on higher return on investment. What impact does that have on the business? Does it help with scalability?
Anybody who plants a seed expects fruit. It's kind of the law of the principle of nature. So it's not a challenge. Neither is it an unreasonable condition for people who give capital to expect a higher return on investment. And actually, I would argue that's a good thing, because if you're doing a good thing and creating value for people, then we want you to do more, right? And if you make money from doing it and investors are happy, then they're going to invest more. So I think it definitely changes the way you think about how you scale your business. And it gives you it's important that people recognize that expected whenever an investment is made.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess...
Hello, are you there?
Oh, go ahead. I think we lost you for a second, so... Okay, let's wait. Hi, Iyinoluwa.
Fantastic.
There we go. We can hear you now. So the next question, which builds on Nee's earlier question about talent, what are we doing to transfer know-how to the local African talents, and what could the diaspora do to help? Which is a very important question. I think we have lost Iyinoluwa. Let us give him a few minutes to reconnect in the meanwhile. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back. We can
I
hear you.
apologize. My internet is a bit on.
No worries.
Okay. I'm just going to turn off my video to see if it improves the network. Okay.
Okay. So where we left off was we had a question building on Ni's earlier question about talent. So what are we doing to transfer know-how to the local African talents, and what could the diaspora do to help in this endeavor?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that one in thinking about transferring knowledge is that first of all, we got to pay attention to infrastructure for learning. So what does that mean? I mean, the more I spend time with young talent, the more I recognize some of the real limitations. So for example, many of them were trying to learn software, computer science. They don't have devices, right? And when they have devices, maybe they don't have power, right? And then they have to worry a little bit about security if they live in poorer neighborhoods. And there's all these problems that just pop up when you decide you want to go and learn. So I don't know what's possible, but there has to be a plan, to be able to engage infrastructure for learning. That has to happen. And then obviously, I think there's a lot our diaspora can do, right, in terms of sharing their knowledge. But my fear right now is that there's a lot of efforts in that direction, but we're perhaps not, I just hope that we don't just stick to, providing mentorship without infrastructure. So I think we're over-indexing on mentorship to some extent. And perhaps we need to spend some more time thinking about infrastructure for learning.
Thank you. Can you elaborate a bit on the idea of that infrastructure? One of the questions in the Q&A is, which infrastructure should government focus on? And I would say to you, what infrastructure do you think creates a possibility for a successful, maybe private-public partnership in this realm?
Yeah, I mean, there's many with respect to the technology space, which is really taking off. I think the core infrastructure that's necessary is, hub cities, really. So, for example, one of the projects we've taken on is a project called Talent City, where we're building an entirely new policy and infrastructure environment for digital economy, right? So you have a place where you have living quarters, you've got training centers, but you've also got power, you've got internet, you've got security. And so people can basically stay there and code or build whatever else it is that they need to build, right? And you want to do this in thousands, 1,000 people, 2,000 people. That's the kind of infrastructure I think the digital economy needs right now. And then there's obviously the standard stuff, you got to invest in your data centers and your subsea cables, particularly outside of Lagos. But I think that without investing in this core infrastructure, it's almost important. It's almost impossible. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you. Thank you. And I think our last question to wrap up from the audience is, what do you think the quality of African corporate board of directors is, and of African corporate governance in general? You mentioned your experience with several hundred large businesses. How well did you find that they were governed?
Okay. Yeah, so I think the I can't really speak to the quality of African corporate board of directors, but I think one of the biggest challenges in general with African corporates is that they lack a sense of mission. So, I mean, oftentimes, if you go read the average African company's, stated vision and mission, it's to optimize something for shareholders, right? And, you can almost guess what it is, right? They always talk about profits. There isn't a sense of mission. There isn't a sense of a place in the world. What are you optimizing for? It's definitely never about the customer. So I think that, fixing those problems are probably the first things to fix before you try to fix the governance, because everything is governed for a reason, right? Like, if you're trying to govern a country and you don't have an ideology or philosophy, you're almost certainly misgoverned, even by your own standards, even if you're a socialist or you're a libertarian. So I think the big challenge it remains, okay, what are you governing and why? Until we fix those problems, it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to get the required reaction, so to speak.
Okay, thank
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much. And, in closing remarks for this incredible keynote that you've given so far, what are your tips for budding entrepreneurs, for startups, for people listening on this call today, wanting to do some sort of brilliance as you have in your ventures so far?
I mean, the biggest advice I have is just, if you can, be extremely focused on impact, because at the end of the day, there's so many things that people assume are important about building in Africa. But my experience has really been, what stays is the stories of the real stories of change, not even your investor returns will be very quickly spent. The funding rounds will be very quickly spent. But the people whose life change because your service exists, that's very difficult to erase. So I think, if you're going to build something critical in Africa, it's extremely important that we focus on impact. So I really hope that despite the situation, the people don't ultimately decide that they will stop being focused on impact. I hope that doesn't stop.
Thank you, Iyinoluwa. That is a very powerful note to end on. Impact is very important and something we should prioritize, even when trying to make a profit that can further that impact. So thank you so much for being with us here today, and we appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of our conference today. And thank you all for being here and for supporting all of the conversations. And please keep this conversation going. It's very important that we think about driving sustainable growth on the continent, a role that we can each play in making this happen. So I'll hand over to Priscilla.
Thank you, Bongiwe. It's been wonderful to have you on. I know it's pretty late in West Africa, so we are really grateful to Ian, who is actually traveling further east of Africa at the moment. So we're grateful that he was able to make the commitment. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Keep the conversation going. Connect with us on our platforms for the Georgetown McDonough School of Business and for the Walsh School of Foreign Service. Connect with the conference on our various platforms, and we hope to see you next year for another wonderful conversation. For those of you in the Washington, D.C. metro area and in the areas beyond that are joining us for networking drinks tonight, we look forward to seeing you. But otherwise, have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and we'll see you next year. Bye-bye.